The opening for this month is the Slav Defense. It's one of the popular defenses against White's Queen's Gambit. So after d4, d5, pawn c4 is the Queen's Gambit. White is giving up the pawn because he will take it back after a move. If black wants to hold on to it, it's not good for black. So this is Queen's Gambit. Now, the most popular response is pawn e6, Queen's Gambit declined. And the second most popular response to Queen's Gambit is the Slav defense, c6. So after c6, basically white can go for the exchange Slav. That's one option. That's more or less equal. White can just go for other normal moves like knight f3 or e3 or even knight c3. So these are the main responses for Slav. The ideas for black include putting a bishop on f5, taking out his pieces generally. So there is extra support for the sender with the c6 move. And the c file is kind of closed if white doesn't want to take. So it's a very solid opening for black. And as all queens come in decline positions are, it leads to very positional games. So we're going to see a game played between a grandmaster called Alexander Ryazantsev and the current world champion Magnus Carlsen in the World Blitz Championship in Doha 2016. In 2016. So let's see how Carlsen played the Slav. d4, d5, c4, c6. Carlsen goes for the Slav. White goes for knight c3 line. Knight f6, e3, a6. a6 is also very popular to prepare b5, to develop the bishop this way or to play c5. Knight out, bishop f5. So he goes for bishop f5. Bishop usually belongs there in the Slav. Queen b3, attacking the pawn. So Carlsen is forced to defend it. He plays rook a7. It looks a little awkward, but the pieces will coordinate themselves later. Knight moves, the bishop is attacked. So Carlsen doesn't want to allow the exchange of knight and bishop by going bishop d6. He doesn't want to put it here or here, blocking his knight and blocking the pawn. So he brings it all the way back to c8. Pawn a4, white gains more space on the queen side. Black continues his development. a5, more space. c5, black strikes at the center. Knight goes back because the knight was misplaced in the corner. It did its job, so job of attacking the bishop. It goes back. Knight out, takes, queen b6, asking for an exchange of queens. Black just retreats. Carlsen just retreats his rook. Pawn takes. Now he takes back. So you can see that he is down a pawn, but after bishop b4, he is going to get back this pawn. So white's pawns are a little weak. This b6 pawn is also weak. So after takes, how can white defend this pawn? Is there any way that you can find for white to defend this pawn? He did that by playing knight a4, defending the pawn. So bishop takes, knight takes, pawn d4, striking at the center, activating his pieces. If white takes and knight comes to d4, it's a good square for the knight. So knight c4, giving extra support for b3. And if pawn takes, knight can take back. King e7. This is a very nice move. The king is needed in the center in the endgame. It doesn't need to be castled because king will be more useful there. So Carlsen brings his rook in, gets his bishop out. So now he has completed his development. Except for this rook, everybody else is in the game. And this pawn is weak for white. b3, supporting the knight. Takes. Rook b8, because knight c5 was coming. So knight c5 anyway. Rook d5, asking white to take the bishop. Takes. So you can see position is more or less symmetric, but these are double pawns and they are very weak. For black, this rook is not active, but his king is more close to the center. His rook is active, knights are good. So it's a slightly better position for black, especially because of this pawn, these pawns, especially this pawn. So rook moves, rook d1, knight d5, rook c1, rook d8. Now all the pieces are in the game. King f2, rook b5. Now finally, black goes for the pawn. The b3 pawn is attacked, so he defends it. White defends it. Knight b4, attacking the rook. Rook has to go back, and knight comes back. So white shows the intention to repeat. Carlsen, of course, does not want to repeat because he's a world champion. He wants to win the championship. So he goes rook d7, just improving his rook. Rook d1, doubling on the d file. And finally, Carlsen decides to take the pawn. Knight takes b6. It leads to a lot of exchanges. Takes. So we have a rook endgame with an extra pawn for Carlsen. The chance of draw is there, but Carlsen converts it easily. He gets his king up, rook up, king up, king comes in, pawn a5, King comes in, rook check, king goes back, c5, king goes to c2, defending that pawn, so the rook is free to move. King c6, rook d3, c4, eliminating the c pawn. So now the rook is more active. We have a passed pawn on the a file. Rook b4, king moves, rook goes back, rook d4, rook b5. So some maneuvering moves, defending the pawn. Takes, rook comes back, rook check, rook moves, pawn goes forward, and now rook b4. So there's a big moment because Carlsen had to decide to give up the pawn, to go for a pawn in game. So here, white doesn't have that many options. He has to take, because if he doesn't take and goes back, then he loses the e pawn. So he got to take. So white takes and takes. So can you look at this pawn in game and see if it's winning for black? The black king is closer by one tempo to the pawns, which is what gives him the advantage. So if you calculate all this, or good for you, the king comes in, and now can you find out the idea to win? How can black win this? If black pushes a pawn, then white will just move the king down or king back. We still don't have a win. Can we go king g3? Then he will also come to e5, and it will be equal. So how can we win a crucial tempo for the king? We do that by just pushing the pawn forward. He plays pawn forward. Now don't play pawn g3, because then the king will have to take a roundabout route to take that pawn. We can't win by just attacking this pawn. He will stay here. So here, what does black do? He can play, if he plays king f5, king f5 is actually an option, but then g3 comes. This would be a blunder, because now we can't touch the pawn. We'll have to go away, and then white might get in as the king. This can be dangerous. Yeah, it is dangerous because he'll pick up the pawn. We'll lose the pawn, we'll lose the game. So let's go back. So in this position, king g3. Again, you have to calculate the pawn race. White will come and pick up this pawn, but black will be faster. King moves, king takes, king moves, takes, push. And after the promotion, white is only able to push it one step. This is a winning position for white. For black, it's a technical position. So grandmasters definitely know this technical ending. So the idea is we get the queen closer, and when the white king goes in front of the pawn, king comes in. So after queen a7, white player resigned and Carlsen won the game. So this is a typical Slav game. It's a positional game. It goes very slow, as in it's a solid position after in the middle game, like after a6. It's a very solid position. There was some awkward moves, but awkward moves are allowed if the position is closed and there's no tactic. Pieces can maneuver themselves. So again, d4, d5, c4, c6 is the Slav defense. White's main options are exchange Slav or the main line, knight f3, knight c3, or e3, which will most of the time transpose with each other because the ideas are the same. And for black, the main idea is to just develop the pieces, take out the bishop, play a6, take out the bishop, castle. And it leads to a very solid game. And that's why black players prefer this sometimes against the queen's gambit.